You look at those 50s UPA cartoons, and they actually have a lot of animation, and they're very lively and they're very organic in spite of being flat. Like being flat doesn't necessarily have to mean being lifeless or barely animated.
Well, here is an example of the Bob Clampett style Daffy Duck, and you notice immediately
Beautiful.
he's very different from the Daffy Duck that you would see from, let's say, Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones Daffy Duck is less liquid, more solid, a lot more straight lines.
Yeah, very angular. Whereas you look at that Daffy picture, and the first thing I think that jumps out at you is how three-dimensional he looks. Like the construction is just very, very solid.
Hmm. What do you?
Liquid is not the first adjective I would think of when looking at that. It just looks like
Oh, this image,
refined.
this
It
is,
just looks like I feel I see a human touch in it. I feel like
mhm.
I feel like no expense was spared. Like I think now you look at Daffy Duck and it's just an economical truncation of what it used to be. Like people are like, we know Daffy Duck. People have it in their mind. How do we just like they're looking at South Park going, these South Park guys are embarrassing us. How do we just simplify this?
Well, the new Looney Tunes are very, very good, all things considered, considering that they're not working with, the kind of production system that existed in the 40s or anything like that. They're doing their best and it actually looks pretty good.
I think that could be owed a lot to people like Michael Rocco. I don't know if you know who that guy is, but he also went to SVA. He was in the class below me, and he was like a huge, huge Looney Tunes fanatic. Like he loved everything. He studied as much as he could about the people who were responsible for creating these cartoon characters in the first place. And I think it shows. Like when you watch the new Looney Tunes, even if it didn't necessarily reach the same level as the ones that I showed you right now, it still looks like people who care about getting it as close as possible to what existed.
Yeah, I mean, style and characters to a large degree are kind of a distraction because what makes good animation good is good animation. It's the ability of animators to kind of try to imbue things with a sense of life and a sense of character and really put themselves into what they're doing. TV production is not organized around that. It's very much organized around the idea of TV as an assembly line.
And is this something that you see today in many of the animations that are coming out? I remember I saw a thread. I don't know if it was your thread. I think it was a friend of yours who was showing example of like the cartoons that came about, like we said, from the inspiration of Hanna-Barbera and UPA, contrasting them to the things that are going on right now with the new Thundercats cartoon and other emulations of like the CalArt style or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I've taken to calling the Cal Arts, the much maligned Cal Arts style Beanmouth, because people get really pedantic online about, well, this showrunner didn't actually go to Cal Arts, even though like 90% of them went to Cal Arts. I say Beanmouth because it pretty much means the same stylistic cliches and people kind of get what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the dominant style and it's dominant because it's easy to draw more than anything. It makes it easier on the cartoonists. It makes it easier on the production of the shows when they have to outsource the animation to overseas. And a lot of TV cartoons really kind of look the same these days.
What
And
where what is the origin of that look, do you think? Like I think that goes back to like The Simpsons and Family Guy.
yeah,
Those are like the first
actually,
things that are
you
so
know,
minimalistic and kind of lazy. They worked for the time, but
The Simpsons was kind of hiding in plain sight as the culprit behind Beanmouth, I think, because it's not just about a bean-shaped mouth. It's also about like those kind of rounded teeth that the Simpsons have. You see those in a lot
general
of
lack of
Beanmouth
detail.
cartoons.
That's
Lack
another
of
thing.
detail. Big circular eyes with little tiny pupils. You see that in a lot of shows. It's kind of the cartoon sitcom style, which a lot of shows just are imitating Family Guy. But Beanmouth is kind of like somewhere between Family Guy and The Simpsons and some anime and manga influence because a lot of kids who grew up in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, they take a lot of influence from the Japanese styles, but it's kind of like the surface detail influence without any of the really highly technically skilled qualities that you see in anime.
I think the sitcom style, I think that format, in a lot of ways, it killed cartoons as like the art form they were. Whereas like the older cartoons, they're kind of standalone art pieces. They're
The
just like,
Simpsons and its consequences have been a disaster for the animation industry.
yeah, between them not being standalone pieces. Now they're this episodic thing. It doesn't have to be episodic. That and like the way the music isn't necessary for it. They're not tied together. They're not one thing anymore. Like it's yeah, it's far
The
later.
question is the show driven by cartoonists or is it driven by writers? Are the cartoonists and animators simply illustrating written scripts, or are they creating the story themselves with storyboards? You can kind of tell the difference immediately. I mean, the biggest giveaway is most of a cartoon just people standing around and talking? If they are, it's not a real cartoon or a true cartoon or whatever snobby term you want to use.
I remember speaking with Fred Seibert of Frederator, and he always insisted on having pitches given to him as a storyboard. And I believe like he was retelling the story of how Penn Ward pitched him the original Adventure Time cartoon, where he went on stage with the guitar and the storyboards, and there was something about it that I don't know. It may not have even been Fred who recommended it. It may have been his friend, but either way, that was a big success for them, having Adventure Time on, and that is the other thing that I think a lot of the new cartoons end up sort of emulating, that same kind of Adventure Time style that at its day was differentiated from the other styles that were around it.
Yeah, I tweeted out a little while ago that Adventure Time ruined a whole generation of cartoonists, and it did in the sense that everybody kind of copied its simplicity, and that made them stop trying so hard. But I mean, cliches are always the biggest enemy, and cliches are kind of what television and movies run on in the first place. So they're not easy to avoid. But, you know, even more than like the style of a show and the way it looks on a visual level, the character design, the big question is, does the show evolve? Does one season have better animation to the next? And there are almost no TV cartoons that do that, because once a show gets sold in TV, the producers and the network execs just kind of want to know what they're getting. They want it to look the same year in, year out. You know, consistency is the enemy of innovation.
Out of curiosity, do you yourself come from a background in animation, or how did you get interested in the subject?
I'm not a pro. I just love cartoons and comics my whole life. I've drawn for fun, but I was never good enough to be a pro. But, you know, drawing for fun, I mean, I think I'm actually not that snobby when it comes to drawing, because I think everybody is kind of better at drawing than they think they are. They just get intimidated by it. And it would be, you know, the world would be a better place if more people just drew for fun. But drawing for fun and drawing cartoons for fun does give you some sense of how hard it is to actually do well and what's involved in it. So, I mean, I hope that informs my criticism of it somewhat.
I'm really interested in, I forgot who mentioned this, who determines the cartoon, right? Are animators kind of creating a lot of the story, or are writers creating the story and animators fitting in? I imagine it's much more of a feedback loop. I imagine it's different from project to project.
All the animators are in Asia. No more animators. So it's basically storyboard artists, but a lot of writers.
Well, then that's who I mean. I one of my favorite comics, The Watchmen. You know, it's Alan Moore, and who was the
Dave Gibbons. But something a lot of people don't even know about Alan Moore is that he started out as a cartoonist. He started out, you know, as a comic book creator, somebody who drew his own material, and even just that got him off on the right foot in terms of being able to write for an illustrator who would then illustrate his script.
That's what's so interesting to me, is that a lot of the best comics, like, you have a person that's writing, and then you have a person that's animating. But I also imagine there's a feedback where the guy can draft something that's rough to give an aesthetic impression, and the artist can draw things that narratively convey information that wouldn't be included in any synopsis or summary.
Yeah, I mean, comic books, it's a bit different because like there aren't that many, what am I trying to say? you read Alan Moore's scripts, and there are some of them available online. Like you can read a script for Watchmen or The Killing Joke or whatever. They are incredibly visually detailed. Like he gets extremely meticulous about where each and every little thing is in every single panel. Cartoon production in TV since the 1960s going into 70s was kind of organized around the way regular TV is produced, where, hack script writers just kind of crank out stuff and then hand it off to be made. And that was completely different from the way that cartoons were made in the golden age of animation, where it was the cartoonists and animators who created the stories from the ground up, and they could always change it at any stage along production. The big significance of John Kay, and the reason I'm the John Kay respecter, is him and actually Ralph Bakshi, just before him on the TV show New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, were the guys who brought back golden age of animation style production somewhat to TV.
Was Ren and Stimpy the last cartoon done in that style, or has there been more?
It was probably the last cartoon done where cartoonists had as much freedom on a TV cartoon as they did. And
it didn't last long either, right? Like a year or two?
Yeah, it didn't last long. And the other thing, too, is that evolution, like I said, you look at Ren and Stimpy season 1 and season 2, there's this huge leap in quality of animation and design and everything. And you can see like they really cared about making the show better and better with every season. Once they got rid of John and the Spumco guys, the show just kind of stagnated and stayed more or less the same. And like I said, that's very rare to see evolution in TV cartoons now.
Well, now they're having
Is
a new
it similar to Rocko's Modern Life?
Well, Rocko's Modern Life was a games production. That was the studio that Nickelodeon created with all the talent they stole from Spumco after Ren and Stimpy got broken up. So, I mean, yeah, there are similarities on a visual level. Rocko's Modern Life, I liked that show a lot as a kid, but I look at it now and it's, I don't know.
I loved Rocko's Modern Life. I hated. You could never get through an episode of Ren and Stimpy. And my parents, too.
It was my favorite.
I hated that show. I just always thought it was
What did you hate about
garbage. It never made me feel good. Like, I grew up on television. My parents would leave and they'd like sit me on the couch and they'd say, don't answer the door. Don't answer the phone. There's food in the fridge. We're going to be gone for 3 hours. Here's the television. Like, you'll be fine.
Do you remember which
5, 6, 7, right? And so like I would just watch television all the time. And my parents used to tell me that Cartoon Network ended at 8:00 or something. They'd be like, oh, Cartoon Network's over. And they'd change the channel and be like, it's over. Until one time my mom was on a trip and my dad couldn't get me to go to bed. So I'm like jumping on his bed and he goes like, go watch Cartoon Network. And I'm like, it's after 8, like Cartoon Network's over. He goes, Cartoon Network's 24/7. And then I was like, ah. And then my mom comes home at 1:00 in the morning and I'm standing up on the couch watching television. I'm like, Mom, Cartoon Network never stops. And then that was the end of that.
Do you remember?
That was the experience for a lot of kids back then, right? Your parents would just leave you at home and just sit there doing whatever for a few hours.
Do you guys like Cow and Chicken?
Oh, Cow and Chicken is great.
Shameless ripoff. I disagree. The jokes don't hold up. Red Guy's kind of funny still, but
yeah, I like Piles the Beaver.
I still think about him. Yeah, hey, I'm Piles the Beaver doll. Hey.
What is Piles? Piles is supposed to be some kind of a sexual infection or something having to do with the butthole, right?
Cow and Chicken had really good animation. You pick any random episode, the characters are very lively. There's a lot of poses and expressions. It's not a characters stand around and recite dialogue to each other type cartoon. And that's like my baseline test for if it's good or not.
Well, I recall, like, back when we were in SVA, I saw Rebecca Sugar's thesis film. It was really lively, like, the way that the characters move around. Like, for any criticism the cartoon would get Steven Universe, like, she is a legit, draftsman.
Her pre-Ren and Stimpy, her pre-Steven Universe stuff is actually very well drawn. It looks much better than anything that ever showed up on Steven Universe. They kind of blandified her style for Steven Universe.
I could see that, but I also wonder with the cliques that are in a Cartoon Network. Like, even though I am in animation where I'm going to be doing more shorts as the years progress, and I also want to make a cartoon myself and be within it, I also wonder about the influence that certain cliques and certain movements have on today's animation, and how much like the Cartoon Network place itself has become sort of like a self-containment zone of certain ideas, and they wouldn't allow other ideas to break through that in-group preference.
Well, a mutual of mine was telling me that at Cartoon Network, it's like the corporate environment is such that you're meant to be like a cog in a machine, and they encourage that mentality. Whereas at Nickelodeon, it's more like encouraging people working together. Everybody pretends to be friends. People go out for drinks after work. So pick your poison, I guess.
When you say pretends to be friends, it's like, I could imagine there are people there who have certain ideas that they can't really say because there's another consensus that dominates everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, pretends to be friends in the sense that it's that happy corporate environment where you're encouraged to think of the company that you're working for as your family and your coworkers as your friends.
I might be an anomaly, but in my experience, there's never anything you're not allowed to talk about, but you have to be very savvy. So you have to listen a lot first, and then you have to warm up to conversations that you're most passionate about. If you just dump everything on the table all the time in the same exact way, like with no, it's like playing jazz. It really is. So, and I think some people they psych themselves out. They go, oh, I'm not allowed to talk about these things. And they kind of stunt themselves. They kind of handicap themselves in their ability to make good impressions while talking about things outside the acceptable norm. And you can see people really poor at these skills that for whatever reason, they just have never had the courage or the tenacity to develop. But I just always knew, like, there would be times when I was younger and there'd be things I wanted to talk about, and I would give myself a year timeline into how to be able to talk about something. I'd be like, oh, I want to be able to talk about this with these people. Well, I wouldn't be able to do that right now. It would totally blow up. So what's the timeline that I'll give myself to be able to have a really copacetic
how to not be a fucking autist by Julie.
The timeline for talking about certain things in the cartoon industry is never, because, you know, like a lot of creative industries, it's been completely invaded by wokeness, and there are things you can say that will get you immediately ostracized, written up by HR. You know, I'm just some guy on Twitter, and I had the whole army of gay witch Owl House friends, fans coming after me. I can only imagine how bad it would be if you were somebody who worked at Nickelodeon or at Cartoon Network.
Are cartoons and animation, sorry to cut you off, are cartoons and animation, because they're considered, like, in our culture more for children, does that sort of have an extra layer of, hey, these are things that you don't touch and these are things that you don't talk about?
I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, people who work on cartoons sort of by nature tend to be very infantile and childish, and there's a lot. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that most cartoonists are nerds, right? So they're kind of like very sensitive people to begin with, but now they all have political causes, so they're like 10 times as annoying.
There seems to be like a lot of aggression that I see in some of the creator photos. I'm not going to say which ones because I don't remember their names. There was one lady that I saw who had like the short blue hair, and the vibe that she gave off was like a very like, a very alpha vibe that you don't want to mess with her. And like, I wonder how many of those kinds of people are in that industry right now.
But why not approach everyone like that? Like, I always go, I don't want to mess with anyone. Like, but I think that's just the optimal way to be able to enjoy the broadest overton window. Like if someone is like, the reason I'm able to talk about so many things is because I submit significantly more than I impose myself. And I think that's counterintuitive for a lot of people. A lot of people have kind of like pride or shame when it comes to submitting, when really it's one of the best ways to
You must
to like
submit.
have because submitting means nothing. It's like, it feels good. It feels good to be like, you know what? Like, it's cool. Like, I don't care.
Kundalini reversal time.
But see, Jules,
Is this a beta defense?
To say what?
a beta defense, is that what you said, Theodore? I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, but I think
It's just
Oh,
a
I'm sorry.
de-escalation posture, right? It's about, if you're concerned about people like blowing up, like I'm never afraid of like being surprised by people's reactions, like, because I look at everyone exactly the same. Like, people don't seem so mysterious to me, and I think it's because I've gone through knowledge backwards. Like, a lot of people say, start with the classics and work your way up. Like, I started with a lot of the cutting edge neuroscience, which I have found to be reality bending. And it's just like constantly confirmed just with my powers of persuasion and presence and, you know, just like magnetism. And it's not because
I'm feeling very persuaded and drawn to you right now.
well, just because I said I'd, you know, try to be a good listener and I'd be open to what you have to say. I don't want to get under people's skin, right? I'm not afraid to, but it's not
Jules
what I
is the
want
best
to
listener.
do.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that.
I think where I and Jules differ, and I completely respect where Jules is coming from. I think it is a great strategy if you want to talk with those people. My whole thing is, I have a limited amount of time on this planet, and I would rather talk with you guys. If I do happen to be in the situation where I would talk to her, that's fine, that's great. But it's like, since I have a limited amount of time to hang out with people, like, I could spend the time simping and submitting and doing all that, but it's like, at a certain point, like, why? You know, like, I'm not exactly sure, like, if it would take like 5 years of constantly submitting and constantly talking to get somebody to change their mind on certain things, maybe it's worth it. I don't know. Like, I'm curious, Jugs, what you think. You are the only female present here in this discussion when it comes to emotional intelligence and things like that, and what you choose to, who you choose to spend time with. Like, if there was like a more of like a butch, blue-haired lesbian creator who you may want to, I don't know, change your mind on certain things, would it be worth it
It
to
shouldn't
put
be
in that
about
time?
changing people's minds. I feel misunderstood. That's because you said we disagreed, but I do feel misunderstood. I'm interested in what Jugs has to say, but I would like to clarify.
And explain.
Well, I come from like an underground music scene, and just like kind of like a creative like scene in general. So I've had to deal with and hold my tongue around these people for a really fucking long time. And as I get older now, it's just more grating to me. And now I, you know, sometimes can run my mouth a little bit, but usually I choose not to engage. I don't think that there's any productive discourse to be had with anyone like that. And that makes it really hard for me to like, actually like being a woman and like the types of jobs that I've had, those are also the type of women that I'd be working with, not in like cartoons, but like say in like customer service or the beauty industry. So yeah, it's just I'm pretty misogynistic, I guess I should also say. So
But let's say if you had a choice to spend time with people, let's say like the ones that you described that you got to watch yourself around, or spend your time with people who would be more vibing with you, what would you choose? Like, if they were also in the industry.
I would choose my homies like you guys and, you know, Skinwalker guys and Perfume Nationalists, little post-right crew. I love having my little echo chamber of like people who I can just like talk to, because like you said, we don't have a whole lot of time on this earth, and I don't have a whole lot of patience
I feel like that's a very old school that's very old school logic. I just think that I have the same amount of time as everyone, and I don't spend that much time around people I don't vibe with. I think a lot of your vibe is internal, and even if you're around people with horrible vibes, it's an opportunity to learn like genuine spirituality and like good philosophy and religion. Because if people are draining the life out of you, the only thing that can like get you through it is good philosophy.
Talking about animation, back to animation for a second, and I also want to get Chris Gassler's take on this as well, because Chris, I know that you are an animator, a fantastic animator, and you are involved with the Newgrounds community. So when it comes to something like the Newgrounds community, for instance, I see in it a alternative to, let's say, the Cartoon Network people, where you have people who are dedicated to, honing their craft while at the same time being open, at least as far as I can tell, to other ideas. Like, I don't think the Newgrounds people have to agree on every single point. At least that's what I found when I went to Pico Day, when I went to the office party back in 2016. So I see in that an alternative to the status quo of the animation industry that has, I think, gone very much to the far left. So I'm curious, Chris, what do you think about that? Like, if more of these pirate ship type communities could start sprouting out, whether it's in animation or in any other field, because I think, and I don't want to get your words twisted, Jules, but what I don't want to have happen, let's say for myself personally, is that I would have to go into an environment like a Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon or whatever, where I would have to, for a long time, be in this hostage negotiator mode, constantly, like, trying to ease people into something where there are already people who are much more open to hearing things that I could vibe with, who I can work with. You know what I mean? Like, if I had to pick one or the other, I would go for Newgrounds.
I mean, I'm the same way. I think my choices demonstrate that. Anybody that knows me, and even people that don't know me, and they just kind of get a brief impression from the outside or afar, like, I like to be able to speak my mind. I value my freedom more than anything, and I value my time. But I also am a very long-term thinker, and I've had a lot of experiences with things going a lot of different ways, including social situations and social dynamics. So, I'm told today by my parents they know me. They know me my whole life. They go, hey, don't mention Trump in that environment. Don't talk about the things you talk about on your show from time to time in that environment. And I have to reassure people, your parents watch the show, I have situational awareness. I'm sure they do from time to time, but I have to just remind people, and I have to constantly prove my situational awareness.
Shout out to Jules' parents.
I missed a little bit of the conversation coming into it, but I'm piecing it together. But I would agree that definitely Newgrounds is more of a middle grounds. Like, nobody really is focused on, and I like that no one's really focused on pushing one ideology. But I will say there's definitely like subcategories and cliques of people in the art community, whether it's on Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, because it's all different like circles. It's Newgrounds is like a melting pot, but there's definitely different cliques and inner circles and stuff. But I think for the most part, a lot of network driven stuff is in the more left side. I came into the conversation. I missed the initial point, but I mean, I'm trying to.
Well, the initial point, if I can condense it, was for me like what I would want to spend my time doing as far as who I would want to hang out with more, where I think Jules is much more inclined to try to reach out to people who may be, way further on the left, and to be more of a hostage negotiator with them. So,
but I don't think like that, right? I'm saying that to you guys as a like a mind trick, as a shortcut, as a shorthand. But I just like getting along with everyone. It's just better, right? It's just a better life to be able to get along with everyone and speak your mind, as opposed to not speak your mind and only like hanging out with some people.
I mean, I like doing that too. It's just sometimes it's difficult to make it work with some people. They're just too difficult for somebody who's not an expert in negotiating or conversation like I am. Then sometimes it's just too difficult to make it work.
I'm just an abrasive piece of shit.
I don't necessarily think that's a problem.
And I'm just a spurg.
Like, I feel like there's a little bit of both, or a little bit of that on both sides of the spectrum, being that, like, I mean, I grew up primarily on the internet, like 4chan, Newgrounds, what have you. But when I got involved in the music scene, like, as I'm sure you guys are aware, like, the music scene is very left-leaning, very liberal-leaning. And I guess, like, it was a bit jarring for me because there was so much policing of discourse, and just, like, it was really easy to get alienated really fast. Like, I don't know how many of you guys were on Tumblr from, like, 2012 to 2014, 2015. But I feel like
Never.
I feel like that same sort of, like, environment can be found on both sides. But, like, the further you get to the extremes of the spectrum, like the really far left-leaning people and the really far right-leaning people, it's kind of not there. Like, I feel like they're a lot more welcoming, at least for me, when I have, like, you know, like, opposing beliefs or even just things that, like, contradict them. They're a lot more open because I feel like they're a lot more well-read on what they believe, and they don't have that same insecurity that someone else might have. And I feel like that insecurity is what motivates a lot of people to rejecting opposing beliefs and opposing dialogue and stuff like that.
What do you think?
I identify as a con man, so I would tell people that I identify as a con man, and so I shared this article from the Smithsonian about the guy who sold the Eiffel Tower twice, and there's a big Think article I'm going to share that's about this and how con men work. And people think con men are just silver-tongued and, like, soothsayers, when they're really just superior listeners. They just listen to what you say because people always reveal what they're most interested in and what they want. And also, most people are uncomfortable talking about the things they're most interested in, what they want, right? Even though actually a total life hack is to just say, fuck it. Like, this is literally exactly what I want and what I want to do. And this is how I want to do it. But if you just listen to people, right? That's how con men work, is they just listen. They're just listening. And if you have that mindset, then it's easier to traverse any environment you want. You don't have to sell people the Eiffel Tower. You can just say, I like hanging out with everyone and speaking my mind. It's a lot easier to sell.
Well, I feel like that's just generally true. Like, the people who are better at understanding the motives and the perspectives of other people are just the people who are just most successful in general, because they can work well with others and they can better just understand other people and make things work with them.
But what about that is the con man aspect of it? Why is that the con man?
See, this is the problem with some of these dark enlightenment ideas, that people are shy about admitting they're familiar with, because suddenly they're worried, like, oh, like, what are so-and-so's intentions? What's really going on, you know, when really a lot of these ideas are equalizers, just like the Second Amendment. Like, I think evolutionary psychology, Machiavelli's The Prince, like this information about how con men work or how social engineers work. I think the world would be a better place if everyone had that information at the forefront of their brain, because then it would just cancel out and you could just get to business faster. You just be able to, like, be casual faster.
I want to get Shantiman's take on all this. Shantiman, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Am I heard? Am I on the radio?
Yes, you are.
Okay, very good. I kind of... So, Jules, is your thing basically just being, like, bluntly honest with people, like, straight from the get-go? Like... Yeah, and then just... So I gotta ask, like, what other people were saying. What's the con man part of it? Because basically you're just listening to, like, what people...
use their techniques. I use their techniques, right? Because if someone can sell you the Eiffel Tower, someone can say, I like getting along with everyone and speaking my mind.
This is why I like pro wrestling. Pro wrestlers call each other workers. They work the audience. They have to listen to the audience and give them what they want so that the audience keeps giving them more money. It's not so in the con man that works, but on a deeper level, this is like this is the core of a lot of magic, like using your will to influence the will of others to change the world. Same concept.
I got a little touch of drama, like putting on a mask and playing a role for what the person wants to be, but at the same time being honest in how you do it.